Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Banson from News 12, and this is our summer 2020 preview video. So over about the next 15-20 minutes or so, we're going to be breaking down what you can expect from the dog days this year, and we're going to have our expert weather panel to help talk about various factors such as hurricane season, beach and boating, and also if we are ready for another hot year, or if we can expect another hot year. And it looks like that's been the trend over the last really recent memory. So with that being said, without further ado, let's go ahead and go around the horn here and introduce everyone. So we've got Mike Rizzo. I think we're all seeing the same order as me, but we've got Mike Rizzo, the top left from News 12 Bronx, Brooklyn. Under him, it's like I feel like I'm in the Brady Bunch right here. We've got Michelle Powers from News 12 New Jersey and also Connecticut. Beneath her, Kiana Lewis, our newest weather team addition. Kiana, thanks for joining us, also from News 12 Bronx, Brooklyn. Next to her, we've got James Gregorio from News 12 New Jersey. And above him and beneath me, we've got Mr. Seth Darling from News 12 Long Island. So thanks so much, guys, for joining us. And we're going to kick things off right here with our city contingent, Mike and Kiana, who are going to be speaking about the upcoming hurricane season. Of course, it begins today, June 1st. It's also the first day of meteorological summer, so happy summer for our purposes, everyone. But it also marks the start of hurricane and tropical storm season. And this year, across the board, as I'm actually just going to pull up the predictions here, some of the main players that make these predictions every year: Colorado State, the Weather Company, and of course NOAA. Everybody predicting an above average season for 2020. And really nothing surprises us weather-wise this year so far. Snow in May. So, I mean, could it get any crazier? They seem to think so. I want to toss it over to Mike and Kiana. And guys, take us through a little bit of why, because it seems like they're really pulling from the same handful of factors why they think it's going to be a pretty above average season. And don't forget to unmute yourselves.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, it's an interesting setup that we got this year. The above average season is just, kind of status quo with the previous years that we've had, having that kind of edge in terms of the warmer water temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean. And you also have this year, extra component like the La Nina that's getting involved in perhaps influencing the way that we see hurricane activity. But I'm going to let Kiana talk a little bit about the La Nina pattern just to kick it off, and then we'll kind of just bounce back and forth with each other. So Kiana, go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. So basically, yes, NOAA is predicting an above average Atlantic hurricane season, and that is all thanks to multiple climate factors, one of which being La Nina, which Mike mentioned. El Nino and La Nina are phases of ENSO, which stand for El Nino Southern Oscillation. This year, the conditions are expected to either be neutral or trend towards La Nina. And what we would really kind of like is the conditions to stay in the El Nino phase, which is when the trade winds are blowing from the east to the west and increasing wind shear and the dry air over the Atlantic. But it's actually doing the exact opposite, and that actually helps to not favorable for hurricanes, whereas we are going to be trending towards La Nina, which is a little bit more favorable towards hurricanes. They thrive off of low wind shear environment, and that's a favorable condition for La Nina. La Nina actually helps to produce hurricanes with that low wind shear. And that's when the water is cooler than normal in the eastern Pacific Ocean due to the stronger easterly trade winds, the exact opposite of El Nino, actually. The stronger trade winds will push the warmer water to the western Pacific, which then reduces the wind shear, and that's what hurricanes love. They thrive off of that, with the jet stream staying north and also helps the sea temperature stay a little bit warmer. And those two factors are just helping that tropical energy really develop. Some of our biggest hurricanes came while in a La Nina pattern, and one of them being Hurricane Irma, which actually affected a lot of Caribbean islands back in 2015. And another thing that I noticed, as we were doing a little bit of research here, I noticed that these La Nina patterns come every about 3 to 5 years. Hurricane Irma actually happened back in 2017, so that timing just all kind of comes right together.
Mike, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, Forecasting the number of storms isn't really my forte, right? So what we really looked at here, both Kiana and I, were just kind of looking at the conditions, this morning, like La Nina, it seems like we are right now are in a neutral phase. So there's really no strong indicator, at least in the near term, that we're going to see anything as active as, up front earlier in the season. I know that we've had already 2 named storms already, but in terms of the higher intensity storms, I think we'll have to wait a little bit later into the season just before we start to see something with that. We're still, again, no La Nina yet. We were in a neutral phase. And, we have to get through, we have to go through the cycle, right? We have to cool down the Pacific Ocean. We have to slow down those trade winds, if not reverse those trade winds. And then eventually in time, we'll start to see those effects, but that's assuming that if La Nina does form. Now, we're talking above normal season, right? So we're talking above normal water temperatures, and that's just something that just transcends from one season to the next. And I know, we already have water temperatures of about, 80 to 86 degrees out in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Caribbean, right? So that needs to be monitored, right? And on top of that, we need to see how the dust coming off of the Sahara Desert is going to be monitored as well, how it kind of just pushes across the ocean. And Kiana made a good point to say that, we're talking about the trade winds, right? And we're looking at that lower shear. If we don't get that environment that supports those types of development for those types of hurricanes, or even, tropical depression, or just the system, right? We're not going to get anything. And add dust to that, well, that's another stint into the process of developing those thunderstorm clusters. So it's an interesting season, like the seasons of the past. It's likely that we're not going to see the peak until as we get into August and September. Of course, if La Nina still holds off by then, maybe even the end of September into October, there could be something, juicing up in the Atlantic. But, the number of storms never really corresponds with the amount of landfalling storms, right? So we are under the impression that, an above normal season, this means this is going to be crazy. Not necessarily. I mean, it's a misconception is that, an active season means more landfalling storms. It's not necessarily the case. You could have a more active season and a lot of these storms could just head out to sea, see you later kind of situation. And then you don't really get, the damage, but even though it was an above normal season. So, that just pays a testament to, in terms of intensity, doesn't necessarily correspond to damage or the risk toward life.
Right. That's the big saying is it only takes one. It can be a very quiet season, but if you get that one storm in your neck of the woods, people aren't going to remember, hey, it was a really quiet season. They're going to remember, hey, do you remember that storm? And, Sandy was a very good example of that, where we did get up to S that year, so it was a fairly active year. The year before with Irene, I think was a quieter year, but of course we had the one storm impacting us. And so no one will remember that it may have been a slower season. And Mike, you made a good point about how Africa, a continent, thousands of miles away, plays a really big factor here. Not only the Sahara Desert dust that gets swept up into some of the jet stream currents and can sometimes affect or inhibit these storms, but also they are predicting an enhanced African monsoon season. So if we're going to have wave after wave coming off the coast, and even if we don't get the La Nina conditions, and even if we're in a neutral phase where there's nothing per se inhibiting these storms, they're gonna, you'd have to. Sometimes when you see those storms coming off of Africa, it's almost like bowling balls. It's just they keep coming and coming, and you're just asking for at least a few of them to develop into storms. But you did make a great point as well. It only takes one, and I think for that we'll send it over to Seth. And Seth, you spoke with someone very important who really knows better than most if we are ready for the next big storm, if we have made the necessary fortifications after Sandy, because of course that's kind of like, where we draw the line. If we had another storm of that level, would we be ready for it again? And especially in some of the vulnerable low-lying areas, I think you as a South Shore Long Islander probably have a really good viewpoint on this. Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're about 10 minutes from Lindenhurst where we live. So definitely South Shore, making sure that we are prepared for if a hurricane or a tropical storm or post-tropical storm or a superstorm, as Sandy was actually called there, were to come in close proximity to us. Again, you don't need landfall itself for the storm to have impacts itself. Again, landfall, again, the eye of the storm actually hitting the coastline there. So a lot of people don't know we've actually had 38, I had to look it up myself, 38 named storms to actually impact Long Island. And again, three key factors of that: Gulf Stream, Bermuda High placement, and the weather systems moving in from the west are all factors to, again, like Mike Rizzo was talking about, landfall. Again, you would need some sort of impact for us to really recall this big of an active season. So again, obviously South Shore were the most vulnerable. Then you get Brooklyn, Manhattan. And again, I had the chance to speak to Joshua Rapp, who's the emergency management for New York City. He's a meteorologist for the emergency management department there with the New York City. And we had a great discussion, spoke for over an hour about everything. But first I want to talk about our own preparedness, some actions that we can take before we're in danger of a storm. Again, May has a week, National Hurricane Center has a week for the hurricane preparedness and what we can do to take our own actions here. Biggest thing, have a written plan, shelter, evacuations, pets. We're going to talk a little bit about that more in a second with what I talked about with Josh, and how COVID-19 is actually changing the way that some of those factors are going to be held there. Having supplies handy, food, water. I used to joke with my mom about, she used to keep bottles and bottles of water in the basement. I was born and raised in South Carolina, and we had Hugo in '89, and then, that sort of thing. So having just water, stored there, medicine, sandbags, especially if you live Fire Island, Long Beach, having those sandbags ready to help protect your home. Some other things, make sure you check your insurance. Are you in a flood zone, especially along South Shore? And does your insurance cover those certain things? Saving important documents. Again, technology helps a lot with that. And then one of the biggest and most important things I think that we stress here, especially at News 12, is having a way to receive watches, warnings, notification, obviously News 12 app. But there's other things out there that we can do to be prepared and to get those notifications. And again, talking with Josh about that, one of the two key things he wanted to plug was something called Notify NYC. So quoting him here, he said, we take methods and try to echo it as well through our own dissemination, referring to National Hurricane Center and things like that. He said one of the biggest things that New York City has done explicitly has implemented our own notification system called Notify NYC. And if you notify that, basically it gives you, it's an alert messaging system that gives you, based on where you live, it gives you these alerts. And that's not just for storms, that actually goes into extensive information other than just weather. But regarding to Hurricane Sandy, I talked to him about things that we've done to improve our preparedness since Sandy. And he said the city has revised and expanded the evacuation zones. They've had 3 evacuation zones before. They've now expanded that to 6. And when they expanded those zones, it added about 600,000 New New Yorkers to those zones. And again, there's a campaign out there. It's called Know Your Zone. Obviously, you can get a notification, but if you don't know where you live within that zone or anything like that, it's not going to help you. So if we say evacuate zone 6, but you don't know if you're in zone 6. So to help with that, again, you can go to Google and Google Know Your Zone. And it's going to encourage New Yorkers to know exactly where they live and know the hazards they face and to be prepared. And that's quoted from Joshua Rapp there. A couple of things we talked about, again, being prepared for the next hurricane, but how is climate change going to impact, obviously we talk about climate change, how that's going to impact the severity and the chance of us seeing another storm. I said Mayor Bloomberg commissioned a New York City panel on climate change to do a big study and determine what the impacts would be of climate change. And he said, thinking in the long term, this is really going to be one of the 2 or the 3 of the largest environmental threats for New York City in the future over the next 100 years. So we spoke about that. And he said that the mayor's office actually has what's called the Mayor's Office Resiliency team there. And they rolled out these interim flood protection measures in 2016. He said, this is a program that essentially provides temporary deployable flood protection at at-risk critical facilities and communities to reduce the effects of coastal flooding. And while more permanent mitigation efforts are designed and implemented. So there's definitely things in place. And we spoke about different types of models for storm surge. And I'm going to stop here. How much time do I have, Jeff? Can I keep going? Or do you want me to stop here? I got a couple more things I want to talk about.
We got about 13, 14 more minutes. So yeah, if you want to make one more point, just wrap it up and we'll move forward. So
okay, absolutely, yeah. So we spoke about storm surge. We also talked about just basically things that the Emergency Management Center is doing to be prepared. And one of the things that I think was really important about our conversation is how COVID-19 and the CDC guidelines actually tie into all of this. And he said that following the CDC guidelines for 2020 hurricane season, knowing what those guidelines are and knowing what the challenges are with that is going to be helpful. Sheltering is going to be different. All these challenges have to be identified. There are people working 24/7 revising all the emergency plans to include all of the COVID impacts. This also includes high heat this summer and how heat is going to be a factor. He said that there are also plans in place to give out 74,000 air conditioners to low-income families. Those couldn't otherwise afford it. Again, so great conversation with Joshua Rapp. We wanted to plug Notify NYC and Know Your Zone. And this also goes out for Long Island as well. Making sure you're in touch with your local emergency office and having a way to receive the information for this hurricane season when it comes to watches and warnings. Jeff?
great stuff, Seth. Very, very cool that you got to sit down and talk with him about all of that. I did not know some of the, things that they had planned, especially giving out those air conditioners. That really is great. So I know that New York City, of course, has done a lot of things to prepare for what could be the next bad storm. Long Beach, out on Long Island, down the shore, down the Jersey Shore. We are going to head on over to our Jersey constituents in just a second, but yeah, they've been doing a lot everywhere along the tri-state area. And as you pointed out, even if a storm stays offshore, it could still give us a lot of issues as far as coastal flooding goes or storm surge goes, and it doesn't have to make a direct impact. Sandy, great example, impacted down towards Atlantic City, but everybody to the north of that felt the effects. So yeah, we could have. We've already had 2 named storms this year. Almost had a third. That would have been the first time ever that happened. We may or may not see one locally this year, but I think something that we can all agree on, and you alluded to it there quickly, Seth, is that the heat forecast this summer, the heat's going to be there in some capacity. For that, we'll throw it over to New Jersey's Michelle Powers for much more. Michelle?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Well, we know that our summers have been getting warmer. This is something that we've been tracking for the last several decades. And within the last decade, since 2010, we've certainly seen an increase in temperatures across the country, around the globe. I'm talking average temperature here, and of course in the tri-state area. So this is interesting that we are actually coming off of a very mild winter. And we had 2 months in a row where the average temperature has been below average. So it sort of felt like we didn't have a spring, and it felt like we had that momentum going from winter, but things cooled off. And you know what? That also happens in a warmer world. We're not going to, continue every year is going to be warmer than the previous one. I mean, that certainly is possible, but just with natural variability too, we are going to see fluctuations. So going forward now that we started the meteorological summer here, looking at June. Okay, so we do have some cooler moments, and I think that will actually help us out with our electricity bills too. But June as a whole, according to the Climate Prediction Center, may actually average out as normal or slightly above normal for us. Now, other parts of the country, it looks like the midsection of the country and parts of the south could end up being a little bit warmer at times than us. We've just seen this trophy pattern set up here over the Northeast locally, and it looks like June may try to want to go back to that pattern. So good news for us, it keeps us cooler and a little more comfortable. But things could really build in July and possibly going into August. So that's something we're going to be watching for. So the Climate Prediction Center is also putting out a forecast for precipitation this summer. We know that's super important because when things heat up, it's you don't want to be in a drought. It could quickly go into that direction. So as we look ahead the next 3 months, we're looking at maybe normal to slightly above in the precipitation department. Now, that all goes out the window if we see some sort of tropical system or even remnants of a tropical system. And that's where in the past, in seasons past, that we've seen precipitation levels go way above normal. All we need is one system to make landfall somewhere along the East Coast or in the South, and we end up with flooding rains here too. So that's something we're going to be looking at also. But, you know, I mentioned, you know, as a whole, we've been warming. The globe has been warming. Climate Central, our partners there, have really helped us out, giving us more data showing that the average temperature for the summer, I have Newark here and also New York City as an example, showing that increase over the last 50 years. Now, it may look slight, but it's an increase nonetheless. And with an increase in CO2 in our atmosphere, this is just going to go up. That's just the law of physics there. One thing I want to point out, though, too, it's not just the daytime temperatures. Okay, we all know the heat waves, and that gets a lot of media coverage where we have 90-degree days, and we are seeing more of those on average, too. But the temperatures at night, those are the ones that are really problematic, because when you don't cool off at night, it makes it difficult for our bodies to recover from that heat. We kind of need that downtime. And we're seeing an increase, especially in our urban areas and cities like Newark and, of course, New York City, just as two examples, because they're local. And, you know, it's that nighttime temperature. So what that's actually doing is it's pulling the average up as a whole. So we're not seeing, more, 100-degree days, but we are seeing that average nighttime temperature come up, and then it just pulls everything up together too. And I just feel like the nights don't get that much attention, and it puts a lot of stress on us too. It's not good sleeping weather if you don't have the air conditioning. It makes it difficult.
I was just gonna say, it also puts a lot of stress on our utilities, because if you do have the AC, you have to run that AC more nights. It's gonna add up, because I'm during the summer, I'm pretty good during the daytime if I have all the windows open. Of course, we're spending a lot of time outside, but it seemed like every night last year, I probably had that AC on more often than not.
Oh yeah. And if you live in a marine environment closer to the shore, the coastline, there you sort of have Mother Nature's air conditioning going on. But for those of us that live inland and in an urban environment, that it really adds up, and you're at a higher starting point the next morning. So say you are in a heat wave, that's also why the temperature will continue to climb too, little by little. So yeah, it just puts a stress on a lot of things, Jeff. You're right.
All right. Thank you so much for that great information, Michelle. And the weather gods have bestowed a few gifts upon us. It looks like our meeting time is been extended to unlimited. So that's good news. We also have a surprise last-minute guest here in the group, Mr. Rich Von Olin there at the bottom. Hi, Rich. How are you? I think you're muted. I'm going to unmute you now, or I'll try to unmute you. There you
got
are.
Me?
Say hello.
Hello. I got a few minutes here. About to go on air and do some TV from News 12 Long Island, and I've been listening to everything we've been talking about, and interesting stuff. It's always kind of fascinating to see what every year brings us, and we've been seeing the trends. And I'm kind of a fan of trends. I'm also a fan of balance, and kind of seeing how things balance themselves out. Like I really feel that you have a mix of active years that gets replaced with inactive years, and then it goes back and forth. And I think, like Mike was saying, and like Kiana and Michelle was kind of saying, and you mentioned too, with hurricane season, I'm not a biggest fan of the long range accuracy, but the trends you can watch. And over the past few years, we've been seeing a lot of things that have been kind of strange. And Arthur was a perfect example. The models, think about it, in the 5-day short term, you all saw this a couple weeks ago, had Arthur coming up the East Coast and hitting Long Island and in New York City. And then a day or two later, the upper air steering winds just pushed it back to the south towards Bermuda. So that's my point, is that, the forecast accuracy in the short term, as we learn every day as meteorologists, is very, very difficult. The GFS, the models, will show one thing, 3-5 days in advance, and then just show something completely different. So, I think what we're going to see this year, is, a lot of variability. I think, again, you've got you had the cold spring again. We had winter arrive here, late April into May. Well, it snowed, right, your house a few weeks ago, Jeff? So, yeah. you know, it's just one of those weird things where we kind of didn't have a winter, but we had a winter in spring. So is that going to push things off a bit? Is that going to upset the balance of the natural flow of the atmosphere and, you know, what happens in the tropics? A lot of questions there. It's tough to say. But
we have had, Rich, we have had some good news with the models this year. The models, you know, seem to drive us all crazy at one point or another, but we've had some pretty big upgrades over the last year. The GFS was sort of the big one. It actually got delayed a little bit last year, and then it finally came out. So we have the new GFS. We have the new graph model, which is sort of replacing some of the more shorter term models. And it just seems, even though, I mean, I keep thinking we're going to plateau at some point, and we keep finding ways to break through and improve these models. So I think we're only getting better for the most part. But you're right. There's just so many variables that they have to take into account. You know, so I don't know if we're ever going to find a perfect model, so to speak. But it seems like we're so much closer to that than we were 10, 20 years ago. It's
gotten better, Jeff. But again, tropical forecasting, when you start to mix synoptics, you know, the standard, you know, quasi-geostrophic northern areas with the, you know, the tropics, start to mix those, it gets really weird. Perfect example last year with Dorian. What happened? You know, again, storm coming out of, you know, the subtropical convergence zone. And what happened? It hit the Bahamas, and instead of coming up the Florida coast, it sat there for what, 2 or 3 days. Dorian last year, most destructive storm, at a Cat 5 sitting there. So this is why we've had these anomalies, these strange things happening, because the standard, you know, motion of these storms just seems to deviate quite a bit from what the models kind of want to pick up on, especially when it hits a certain latitude. I mean, we've seen that a lot with Joaquin, with Dorian, some of the other storms that have just stalled.
Harvey too.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that. And yeah, I think that's just why you have to say, you know, the best thing to do is just really, you know, stay in touch, you know, watch the forecast, watch what's going on, check in day after day, because, you know, our job as meteorologists is not to be absolute 5-7 days down the road, but to say, look, something changed. We got to tell you what changes. And, you know, we've been seeing a lot of that lately. And I think we have to just, you know, just be smart about it and say, listen, a storm that's in the ocean looks like it's going to hit the coast. It may not. It may stop. It may stall. It may go right. It may go left, you know. And, you know, it's just one of those things. You know, we talk about the spaghetti plots all the time. A lot of people who watch, you know, they wonder what these spaghetti plots are all about. Maybe I'll let you guys talk about this because, you know, there's a lot of confusion with that. You see this whole mass of different, you know, lines, and they're going in different directions sometimes. Maybe like Michelle, or I mean, who's been studying some of this stuff. I mean, is this going to ever improve to the point where we can have consistency?
Feel free, guys, to chime in here. You can unmute your mics and just talk. We can have some crosstalk here.
I do want to say something. It's Rizzo. I do have something that you know, I've read a couple of years ago that, you know, there's a lot of ongoing research in terms of kind of, you know, narrowing down the accuracy, especially when they came out with the new GFS, the full volume 3, the FV3 model. And they were talking about how, you know, predicting the hurricane seasons have become more and more accurate, that the cone of uncertainty, which is that cone that you see whenever we forecast storms and we put it on air, kind of like, you know, extends outward and then it ends like an ice cream cone. And that has actually gotten narrower and narrower in terms of the margin of error, whereas it used to be fatter and wider. You know, the more that you go out, now the research has shown that we've had better luck with some of the more contemporary modeling to help kind of shorten that cone. So I guess we are headed in the right direction, Rich, if that answers your
yeah, oh yeah, I'm optimistic. You know, again, the science is out there. We're getting better, but it just seems like Michelle mentioned, you know, with the changing planet, the changing water. I mean, it's a big deal. It really factors into the models, which probably just are not really aware of how the planet's changing. I think you got to really make adjustments here to really get a better forecast. You agree with that, Michelle?
I do. Yeah, Rich, I was just going to jump in there because that's what I've been sitting on some of these Climate Central webinars. And we were talking about how is climate change, how is the warmer world impacting these storms? You know, we know there's a connection with rainfall. We've seen heavy rainfall and a big increase here in the Northeast from a warmer atmosphere. So now, you know, the experts are really trying to study these storms. And because we've had in recent history, some of them, they don't move. We're looking at more stationary systems. So how's the warmer world impacting the jet stream and the flow, like you said, and also, you know, the amount of rain that we're seeing within these storms themselves. So if you get one that stalls because of climate change. It's going to rain even more because of climate change too. Like, there are connections, and these are things that we're slowly figuring out, unfortunately, in the wrong way for us, though.
Yeah.
Hey guys, let me chime in here. Hey, it's James.
Hey, James.
A couple quick things here. You know, the elephant in the room is, in a way, COVID-19. So sorry if that picture's a little funky here. I'll hold this up. Sorry about that. Anyway, COVID-19 is the elephant in the room. You know, we saw the atmosphere really clean up, the reduction in greenhouse gases with the world economies basically shutting down. So the end result is, how is that factored in? We used to get a lot of data from commercial airplanes as well. If you fly a particular route, you might have had 4 of those flights a day. Those are now reduced to 1. So we're in sort of a data void compared to where we were initially before the pandemic as well. So all of these are factoring into this new reality, and some good things for the environment. You know, COVID-19, I think in general has been great for the environment. Folks not driving, staying home, greenhouse gas reductions, but it's also created some data issues as well. So as Rich was talking about, you know, it's going to present some forecasting challenges going forward.
I'm so glad you brought those up, James, because I actually had them on my list here of things to talk about. I did a couple of articles last month because we're lacking so much airline data. People just aren't flying right now. So we've seen a couple of varying opinions. Will that affect the data? Will it not affect the data? I mean, common sense makes you think it is going to affect the data somehow. And then, of course, like you said, with the reduction of greenhouse gases, not just locally, but globally, you know, assuming this is a short-term thing and we do sort of get back to normal in the next year or so, I think it's a sure thing that we will. There will eventually be some kind of medical breakthrough with a vaccine. But when things get back to normal, will this blip in the grand scheme of things, will it have a big impact? I think it's very interesting. It remains to be seen. But
I think it will. I mean, ironically, you know, we had that horrible March was a decent month, and then our weather turned in April. Our weather turned almost about the same time or shortly thereafter. Everybody started quarantining. So the reduction of greenhouse gases, and boom, it seems like we finally went back to a cooler, you know, that little second shot of winter-esque weather. So obviously, you know, I'm sure it'll be studied at great length. This is just a you know, kind of guess on my part, but very, very ironic how it sort of coincide with the quarantine. First, you know, the Asians quarantining, then the Europeans, and then us. And so obviously those kind of teleconnections were being made.
James, I want to stay on you actually, because yes, we're talking about, you know, hurricanes, which is a pretty serious topic. The potential for heat waves, you know, a lot of us like the heat. We like to go to the beach, but heat waves can be very dangerous as well. But you and also Mr. Von Olin, which we'll kind of have you guys can both talk about it. But Boating Safety Week happened a few weeks ago, and it's very big. I think also playing along the lines of COVID, a lot of people are buying boats. A lot of people are finding ways to get on boats. I think we're going to see a more active water season this year on all of our waterways, Long Island Sound, the ocean, the Jersey Shore, the Hudson River. Everybody is going to see, you know, a lot of boat traffic because it is a socially distant activity. So with that being said, I think you may have more people on the water that are also less experienced with being on the water. So boating safety, paddlecraft safety, things that are right up your alley, as well as cold water. I mean, the water is freezing this time of year, and a lot of people, that first sign of summer, like we had this weekend, people are flocking out to the water. So I wanted to have you elaborate a little more.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, this weekend I was at the beach, and you know, it was packed. I guess, you know, 6 feet socially distant perimeter around each person was obeyed for the most part. But you're right, you'll have more folks heading out during this pandemic, if you will. Another thing that's been really tough to come by has been trying to find a bicycle. If you know, I have a bike on order that's, you know, was ordered in April. It's still not here yet. And my local bike shop came and tell me where it is and when it's going to get here. So that's another interesting sidebar. But anyway, in terms of, you know, getting out of the water, everybody's getting out of the water if they can. Swimming, recreating, paddling, you name it. And again, it's hard to keep that socially distant environment. And Jeff touched about it. You know, the water is cold for now, but it will warm up. And, you know, we see the greatest range in water temperatures here in New Jersey. You know, one of the greatest ranges in the country. We go from the upper 30s in the winter to the upper 70s generally in the summertime. So obviously where maybe it's 60, some recent upwelling dropped those temperatures over the last couple of days. So still cold. So folks getting out there could get into trouble quickly. But keep in mind, more so than the cold water, rip currents, different things like that. You know, if a lifeguard needs to make a save in this environment, you're putting them at jeopardy because of the virus, because of the pandemic, even more so than they would be. So again, be mindful, be smart, listen to the lifeguards. If you're coming to the beaches here in Monmouth County, New Jersey, the freeholders had a press conference talking about know before you go. Kind of interesting. That used to be our tagline here for traffic and weather. So I'm sure Rich will like that. But check each local beach, their rules, their restrictions, their parking. And of course, always check in with lifeguards. Look at the flags. Say, hey, is it no rip current day to day? Is it conditions, caution? Is it red flag? All these things that you could do to kind of make it more safe and thus limit any potential exposure on yourself and or lifeguards here. So these are all things that you need to do. You need to be smart and just mindful and, think a little bit more about, how you may approach, venturing out into a boat or boat safety or knowing the rules of the road. Just education is key, and just to be mindful and obviously just slow down generally and, be a little more mindful in this environment. I would say it's probably your best bet. Jeff?
Great stuff, James. Rich, do you have anything to add?
Well, just to kind of, go on with James is saying, the amount of, I'm a big fisherman. I'm out and boating a lot. I was out this weekend. And, there definitely is more boaters, more private boaters out there. They just finally opened up the commercial for hire fishing, which is good. The party boats are out there, so that's going to help a little bit. But the amount of boaters, I've never seen so many in the bays, in channels. And a lot of it can be attributed to, like James said, it's with the COVID stuff, but it's also, think about it. There's no Little League. There's no ball games. There's no sports. There's no Yankee games. There's no Mets games. There's no concerts. There's no movie theaters. This is what people are doing. This is their recreation, and the beaches too. I was down by the beaches, Lido Beach, Jones Beach, they're half capacity. You can't even get in there at a certain time of day. They'll lock you out. So, to get outside besides sitting in your backyard, this is something that, the boaters can do. I mean, marinas opened about a month ago, which was good. And this has kind of been the only game in town right now. And despite the cold water and everything, people are just getting out there. So a lot of factors involved. We hope that throughout the course of the summer and the year, not only, does things start to spread out a little bit, we get more opportunities to do more stuff besides just go on the boat, but also people kind of can learn about safety. We had a tragedy a few weeks ago in Jones Inlet. Boaters tipped over there. It's just one of those things on the ocean. You got to respect it a lot. You got to be very careful, watch the forecast, and like anything else, just be safe. But then again, when you're cabin fever, and we've had what's going on for the last few months, and then the weather gets nice, we warned everybody. Everyone's going to try to get out and do some stuff, and that's exactly what's happening right now. So anyway, I have to kind of sign off here, but this has been pretty cool, Jeff. Thank you.
Of course, Rich. Thanks so much for taking a few minutes before your show. I know you're busy getting ready for that. So we're kind of winding down things here. We've talked about some of the most important things: hurricane season, the potential for another hot summer, several heat waves. And it seems like we've had some pretty wild vacillations in these temperatures. But when all is said and done, when the dust settles, I personally expect another above average summer temperature-wise here across the Northeast. And also the rain has, for the most part, as Michelle touched upon, we've had several heavy rain events, a lot of slower moving systems with the atmosphere potentially heating up more. Actually did a little study on this a few years ago. That the atmosphere now, of course, with a warmer atmosphere, is able to hold more water vapor. Typically, the atmosphere kind of goes back and forth between 2 and 3 to maybe 4%. And now there are some researchers that are saying the atmosphere has the capability to hold 5 to 6%, which may not sound like a lot on the surface, but that's a huge. I mean, consider how huge the atmosphere is. 1 to 2% is enormous, and with that potential for more rainfall. Perhaps we could see some more flooding events this summer, not storm surge from a coastal storm, but as far as rainfall. And Mike and Kiana, I know up Bronx and Brooklyn, some of those roadways over there, very poor drainage. And I believe last summer there was a cell that popped up right over the Bronx, and it just dumped rain. It was a cell, I think it was a sea breeze front, where you kind of just had that cell camping out. It just popped up, sat there for like an hour, and then it was gone, and the sun was out not too long after that.
Yeah, we have a lot of those kinds of issues in New York City, especially being an urban environment. It's hard to drain the water once it rains, right? Because you only have so many drains, and you don't have enough of the the grass, the vegetation to help absorb it anyway. So every so often you get that very heavy cell that moves across the city, and you got every overpass that it rains over just piling up with that water. And so, you're driving, you're going on the Cross Bronx Expressway, or whether you're going, down the Bell Parkway, and you go onto that overpass, and suddenly like there's a giant puddle, and you end up going through those giant puddles. So yeah, a lot of that is part of this issue. And it kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about when we're talking climate, a warmer environment. You add those greenhouse gases, you make a warmer atmosphere. For Michelle, you could correct me on this one because you're the guru with this kind of stuff, but I think it's like for every degree warmer on average that the air goes, it's like 4% more water vapor could be held in the atmosphere. And that of course corresponds to rapid intensification for hurricanes, corresponds to juicier thunderstorms, and you end up getting more of that flooding in the urban areas. So that's yeah.
Oh no, that's exactly that's what excuse me. That's what Jeff was saying. Yeah, that it's just a small percentage, but we're starting to notice that, right? We're starting to notice these flash flood episodes happening more and more, and you just need that one thunderstorm to do it, or you just need that one tropical system and to stall out over the area, and then we're done and we're over our normal or average precipitation for the season or even the year, depending on how large it is. But
Seth, you posted some. Oh, sorry, Michelle. I didn't mean to cut you off there. No, I was just going to say, Seth had some really cool video that he sent in last summer from a very slow-moving thunderstorm over on Long Island, in not too far around from where you live. I think it might have been your wife actually that videoed it. I just remember seeing it was like someone filled up a pool. I mean, you couldn't drive through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting things with some of these cells too, especially having lived in Florida and how important sea breeze is with these thunderstorms, is especially when we talk about percentage of, when we forecast a percentage for storms that day, right? 50, 60%, and what that actually means and how to convey that to everyone at home. Just because it doesn't rain at your house specifically doesn't mean that the storm didn't happen. And sure enough, these little cells during the summer can cover a couple miles, and then just north of Sunrise or just east of a parkway here and there, and it's nice and sunny. So these thunderstorm cells, again, high updraft, a lot of intensity in a condensed area, can drop a lot of rain real fast. And again, that's what you guys have been alluding to as far as the flash flooding going. But I think that might have been my wife's video. I'm not sure. We'll give her credit for it. We'll give her credit for it.
All right. I wanted to talk to you about something that we actually just had a specific day about. It was Heat Safety Awareness Day. We've had a lot of these special weather days and special weather weeks over the last month or so that the National Weather Service has kind of been campaigning for. This is a big time of year because a lot of the summer stuff, the hot weather, the hurricanes, the boating, now is the time to prepare for it. You don't want to be preparing and scrambling when the event is imminent or, in the middle of occurring. So we just recently had a Heat Safety Awareness Day, and New York City area is one of the most affected areas. New York City, New Jersey typically get some of the most numerous excessive heat warnings, heat advisories, although we've been seeing them pretty much across the board uniformly the last few summers. But heat safety is a big thing, recognizing the signs of heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and just the basic things about drinking water, wearing light colored clothing. Something that's been really big, and I still can't believe I have to talk about this, is leaving small children, pets, elderly in cars over the summer. And we already have had one death from it in April this year nationally. And it just seems that you're always hearing this story pop up during the summer. So, I mean, that's kind of the number one. When I talk heat safety, that's number one for me, just because it's a very easily avoidable problem and it's still happening. Heat stroke, heat exhaustion, that could be a tougher issue because a lot of us have to work outside, have to go outside. And sometimes, you know, it may seem simple, but we forget water. We you know, didn't happen to wear light colored clothing that day. So that's something that I think is not always as, you know, kind of a no-brainer issue. But of course, as we enter these warm summer months, we want to make sure we're all staying safe as possible. Light colored clothing, drinking water, avoiding middle of the day exposure. You know, trying to do any work in the early morning or late in the evening when you're not getting those sun's strongest rays, you're not getting the hottest temperatures outside. And again, James said it pretty nicely as far as our water temperatures, how we see one of the biggest ranges of water temperatures in the country. We also probably see one of the higher ranges of air temperatures in the country, where we can get, you know, to 0 degrees, but we can also warm up to the hundreds, whereas you know, places either north or south of us don't see that wild vacillation of temperatures. But we're going to start to wrap things up here. I want to thank you all in advance for joining us and adding your knowledge and insight to this video here. I'm going to kind of I'm going to Brady Bunch us again here. So I want to go, we'll go around the horn again. We'll start with Mike. Just your final thoughts on ways to stay safe this summer, how to prepare, and you know, just any general thoughts you might have.
Yeah, regarding you know, regarding tropical systems, thunderstorms, any kind of active weather, it's very important, you know, just to follow the forecast, stay with us at News 12, and realize that each region and each location is going to experience something just slightly different from another. I can't stress the fact that, you know, weather is not the same for everybody at the same time. You know, when it's thunderstorming in Brooklyn, it's a beautiful sunny day in the Bronx. So we need to be very vigilant on the ever-changing weather conditions. We have to be aware of severe weather when it comes through. And when we do have a tropical system, even though it may not threaten our area, it's always worth a look at, because it could, you know, as we were hearing earlier from Rich Vunnel, and it could change trajectory, and the steering winds could send it into a whole new tailspin, if you get what I'm saying there. So just follow the forecasts and pay attention as weather roars.
Yeah, plug the News 12 app, but really it is a great tool because it does send these alerts right to your phone when there's a flash flood warning, you know, any kind of a breaking weather alert. You hear that sound on your phone. You could track the weather for yourself. You could track any thunderstorms that may be popping up over your neighborhood. And there's also a lot of great marine data there. Tides, whenever there's coastal flood advisories or anything of that nature. And of course, you can track tropical weather there as well. So next, Michelle.
Okay, yes, 'tis the season where we all need to be on our toes and where things can change rapidly when we have these storms that pop up. But yeah, everyone kind of jokes and makes fun of me when I say this, but it's so true. When thunder roars, go indoors. That's all we need to know.
Good advice. I love it. All right, we'll go over to Kiana next.
And another thing I want to piggyback off of Mike, where we were talking about things being different where you are, remember that we are serving hyperlocal forecasts. So we're focusing on where you are, particularly trying to keep you safe. We have, you know, Long Island participating in Long Island's forecast. We're taking care of the city. We have New Jersey. So we are one team, but we are trying to keep us all safe at different parts of the city and the region. Very true.
We are public servants. We're doing a public service. Mike Rizzo, you always say something that sometimes I forget because we're always trying to be as accurate as we can. But a lot of times we have to remember that we're dealing with a fluid environment that is ever changing. It is meant to change. And I tell people when they say, hey, this changed, but I said, yeah, but you knew about it because we let you know that this changed. So, you know, we are just trying to keep people informed and ultimately keep people safe. And I feel like sometimes that gets a little lost sight of. James, we'll go over to you. Oh, hold on. You are muted, sir.
All right. I just unmuted. You know, forecasting the weather is like jumping on a speeding train. It never stops. So we're always trying to play catch up here. And sometimes we do it well. Sometimes we don't do it as well. So that's why you just got to be smart. You got to be mindful. Stay with us here at News 12. We'll certainly keep you updated online or on the air or with our app or in the virtual world or however. And we're here to do that. So, you can get a lot more from us than you can get generally from just looking at some generic forecasts on your phone. We'll explain the minutia, we'll explain the details, we'll explain the changes and how that may impact you. And that's what we do. One final word: be smart this summer. Be mindful again in this kind of pandemic environment as we ease out of it. Still respect the social distances. Don't head out into the waters and put lifeguards at undue risk if you know that you're going to be super challenged. And just have a happy and safe summer. But again, we're all a little stir crazy from being cooped up for the last couple months. So just be extra careful and extra mindful.
That's great advice, James. I appreciate that. And as you and Kiana alluded to, I mean, us being hyper local, we can do a lot of really cool things here at News 12 that I feel like some of the bigger stations can. We have that ability to get into your communities and really be able to, focus on these hyper local regions. And I feel like that really is just so many advantages that our residents and our viewers can take advantage of. All right, Seth, we'll close it out with you, sir.
Okay, everyone's made great points on being notified, how they can stay notified, and how to stay safe this summer. But the biggest thing to me is it falls back on the individual. If we tell you this information, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to be prepared? And then what are you going to do in case something does affect you in your area? And I think the biggest thing for everyone, again, having that plan in place. Just driving on the southern state, northern state parkways, can be challenging just on a normal day. Imagine trying to evacuate. Where are you going to go? What are you going to take? I have 2 dogs. What's going to happen with them? Are they going to, be able to fit in with everything else? Of course, they're going to be the first things in. Then we pack the bags. But again, just having that plan in place, knowing what you're going to do. And that goes with just simple things, especially with heat this summer, as everyone's been mentioning. Staying hydrated just isn't a chug some water right before you go out to the beach in the morning. Staying hydrated means that you've had water the day before. That's actually when you hydrate, and then taking it from there. So that's really it for me. Again, it's taking our information and then applying it to how it's going to affect your daily lives. And we're going to try to provide you with as much information as we can, and that way you can make the best and the smartest decision.
All right, well said, Seth. And I've got one more Brady Bunch. I want to get a wave from everybody. Everybody wave. This is thank you so much. It's great that we're able to do this and still stay connected, being together while being apart during this time. And, what does that say, Michelle? Hold that up again. Ah, there it is. When thunder roars, stay indoors. I think it's a magnet. I love it. If you could send one of those to all of us, that would be awesome. All right, guys. Again, this has been our News 12 2020 summer special, and we talked about a lot of great things today with our weather team from all of our regions. And again, we thank everybody so much for joining us, and we hope you found this informative, helpful. We hope you all will have a great summer 2020, despite everything going on. But remember to, above all, play it safe and be prepared. And now is the time to really start thinking ahead before we really get into the heat and humidity and the heart of hurricane season as we go throughout the summer months. So again, I'm Jeff Banson. Thank you again to all of our meteorologists, Mike Rizzo, Kiana Lewis, Michelle Powers, James Gregorio, Seth Darling, and Rich Blunt Olin for joining us today. And we'll talk to you again soon.